reunion. A couple people I'd like to thank before we get started. This all started because basically Rex Ryder. Stand up, Rex. There's Rex. So everybody want to thank Rex because he's got this whole thing started, and this is what it is today. So let's give him a round of applause. So why it started? He's part of the Soil and Water Conservation District here in Paulding. Paulding County just took over the old ponds out here. Well, he come with some questions about when the ponds were built and why they were there, and some different questions. And I could answer the whys, but I couldn't answer the whens. So they thought maybe we would have a reunion, get some of the people that used to work there. Maybe they remembered when the ponds were built. So it all started because of the ponds. It's called the Black Swamp Nature Reserve, Nature Center. It's down here at the end of the road. So this is where it all started. Today is kind of where it's all led to this point. We've gathered up a lot of pictures, some different memorabilia from the plant. We have got some people that used to work there. We've got a guy who used to own the plant today. So, you know, we've come a cross-section of a lot of different people who probably haven't seen each other in maybe 30 years, somewhat. So, to start things off today, we thought we'd just, well, to start off was looking at the pictures, maybe jogging some memories, different things of what you remember about the sugar beet factory, what you heard from your parents, who told you about it, and different things like that. I moved here in '57, it was never running. I've never seen it run, never seen smoke come out of the stack. I did take that back. When they knocked it down, I seen a lot of smoke. So, as far as I've only ever, that's the only smoke I've ever seen on the stack. But I'm sure a lot of you do remember it. So today, we're just kind of going to let some of you reminisce about what you remember. Get up here and tell them what you remember about it. We're going to videotape it all, so somewhere down the road, it'll be preserved for your grandchildren and great-grandchildren to look at someday. And actually remember that there was a sugar beet factory here. To look out there now, there's still a lot of people in this room who don't remember ever seeing anything down there other than a bunch of junk piled up like it is now, you know. Concrete, there's some lime piles, but that's all a lot of people remember. Nobody remembers even what the building looks like. So this is kind of our goal today. Maybe we can help Rex out in his search to find out time period when the ponds were built, maybe by whom, and some different things like that. So Rex is he's compiling some information today. He's listening to all of us talk, and he's going to be writing, and listening. So if you see him over there working, he's a listening, but he's a writing too. Anyway, anybody want to be first? I can tell you one guy, maybe. Albert, you want to be first today? This is Albert Root. He's from Ottawa. He used to own the plant. He bought it. I can't tell you what year, but he will tell you that in a few minutes. I didn't even know this man existed until Friday. He seen the article in Toledo Blade. His kids did. They gave it to him. He called me up. So today, this morning, I said, I'll be over and pick you up. We'll be over. So here he is. Albert, come on up and use the microphone. They can hear you a little better. Well, maybe not. They'll hear you better with this big one. So I thought he might be a little extra attraction. Got a lot of information.
Well, I'm glad to be here. Glad to be here. This is my first experience on this end of the deal. So if I fumble and stutter around, it's because I'm lacking experience. I did buy the plant, and I had the pleasure this morning of talking with Harvey Hyman. And I said, Harvey, what year did I buy the plant? And he said, well, if you can't remember, how do you expect me to remember? So that's the start off. I did have Harvey handle the legal work in buying it, and I bought the plant from the Luntz Iron and Steel Company in Canton, Ohio. I spent maybe 10 years owning it, trying to reorganize it and so it would be a beet sugar refinery. I was unable to do it because it was at a time when you had to have two allocations. You had to have an allocation to sell the sugar, and you had to have an allocation to grow the beets, which was strictly a political mess. I was unsuccessful on both ends. I recall going to Washington to enlist some political help, starting with Mike DeSalle, who was governor, who had been the previous governor here in Ohio. And he suggested that he had some friends in Washington that owed him a favor. So he called up two gentlemen, and the next morning I had an appointment to meet with them in Washington. And their names were Oscar Chapman and Marty Friedman. Now maybe you people remember Oscar Chapman, who had been a previous Secretary of the Interior in Truman's administration, and Marty Friedman, who was Truman's secretary in the White House. Well, I got a little nervous when I found out who I was going to see, but I went down and walked in their office on a Tuesday morning. A girl took my hat and coat, hid it, I thought, and in a few minutes I was in the office of Oscar Chapman talking with him, and after looking at his office, I knew I was in the wrong place. I was impressed with his office. He had 8 telephones in the office, 2 in each corner of the room, with 2 Davenports in 3 corners, and his big desk in the 4th corner. I told him my story in 10 words or less because I could see that meter running around when I went in the office. After telling him what I had in mind, he bailed me out by saying, well, he thought they had a problem. So he went in with Marty Friedman, talked with him for maybe 15 minutes. Came out and he said, we have a problem. We represent the Mexican government on sugar. And he said, this call isn't going to cost you anything, so let's visit. Which I did. I visited with him about 45 minutes. And I knew it was a political thing. The allocations for the acreage went to 2 new plants, one in New York State and one in Maine. Neither one, I think one of them operated for part of 1 year. The other one never operated. They were brand new, big plants with good equipment in it. And one was sold to the Canadians, and one, I don't know where the other one was sold. But we weren't successful. I can recall 2 other things that might be of a little interest. One day I was over here, and I heard some chopping going on, and I thought it was back in one of those or the West Pond, I guess. And I walked back to see what was going on, and here were 2 kids with new hatchets, or Boy Scout axes, chopping the trees down. And I said, what are you kids doing? He said, well, we're cutting wood. I said, well, did the owner give you permission? He said, nobody owns this place. So that was my introduction to them. I said, well, I happen to be the owner, and I don't want those trees cut down. They ran faster than I could. I also remember I was talking with a railroad agent here, and I think the last cars that were pulled out of that plant was loaded with equipment going to Central America. And I think that's about the end of what I have in mind. I don't know how long I owned the plant, maybe for 10 years. And I finally sold it to 2 local men, and I told them that there were some kids that were, I think it was a Blinking Owl restaurant downtown, and they had leased it for the summer to have motorcycle races in the line pits, ponds back there where they could raise a lot of dust. And I told Mr. Hartzog, I said, you better talk to those kids before you do any work. Well, they ignored the kids and went to work the next morning with their equipment. And I think the kids got an injunction against them and stopped them from tearing up the ponds anyhow. I'm glad to be here, and I didn't think that I would see such a turnout. Thank you very much.
Does anybody have any questions maybe for Albert? He might be able to answer. All right. Well, we'll kind of move on then. Is there anybody else who wants to be second? Anybody? Oh, I'm sure somebody wants to. All right, Bill.
I'm Bill Bidlack. My father was involved with the sugar factory for better than 30 years. He started out as in the office as a bookkeeper and ended up head of the field force. Nothing I'm going to say will help Rex a whole lot. I jotted down some little notes and hopefully they'll jog some memories of some of you people that had things to do with the sugar factory. I was hoping that Justin Kressel would be here today. He's the last remaining member of the field force. And one of the things I remember about Dad was he tried to do a lot of his work over the telephone. And when he would call Justin, he would call, we live in Oakwood, and he would call Arthur to get the operator. Then he'd call Ayersville, and then he'd try to get to Jewel. And from Jewel, they could ring Justin. So you can imagine the dilemma he had trying to do any business with Justin by Arthur, Ayersville, Jewel. It was the same way when he tried to call growers to tell them that they could pick their drill up today or they were going to have labor at their place at such and such an hour. So the telephone dilemma was quite a thing that I recall because I don't know how many hours they had spent on the phone, and today it would be different. Another thing that he told me was the battle to see who could bring in the biggest load of beets. And he told me, a gentleman that you would all know, but I won't embarrass him here. He brought in the biggest load. The only thing was that he ruined the wheels on his brand new high-wheeled wagon. And he got the biggest load on, but that evidently was a competition. See who could bring in the biggest load of beets. Then there was always the years when it was muddy at harvest. I wasn't very old, but nothing I ever saw about sugar beets was anything less than heavy work. It always looked like a lot of work to me. And in the fall, when you had a muddy fall, with all the tear that was there, that most of them wound up taking the mud back home with them, that was always interesting too. I thought I felt the earth rumble a few years ago, and that was probably Dad rolling over in his grave, because I brought a piece of Alice Chalmers' equipment. He had an experience when he was field man. They'd always bought the Oliver Superior beet drills. They were very satisfactory. Well, somebody sold him a bill of goods that these AC drills would be just as good as the old Superiors. And I think they had them for about 2 years. And they were nothing but a hunk of junk. They bent the frames, and when you're loaning equipment out to a variety of different farmers and different farming practices, so he didn't want to see anything orange on the farm. But I owned 2 AC tractors at one time, so probably would upset him. I recall when I was just a little kid, the sugar company always had a big tent at the fair, always in the same spot, and they sponsored a lot of races, give the blankets for the different horse races, and they were one of the biggest things in the county. That was always good for me because Dad or one of the other field men was always in the tent, and I'd have my run at fairgrounds, and those are some happy memories. Probably the worst experience when my father was trying to arrange labor after the war started. And I remember he made a couple trips to San Antonio to try to wind up, I guess we called them Texicans then. They weren't Mexicans, they were of Spanish descent, and we have a lot of people living in this city that are descended from these people, came up here to work beets, and some fine families. But his worst experience was when they sent him down at the Loop of Chicago to round up labor. Can you imagine going recruiting beet workers out of the Loop in Chicago? Well, he brought a bunch of them in here, and the way they would work it, they would give the laborers a meal bill. They'd set up at a local store someplace. They'd have an account where they could go and get their food, and they'd put them in a house somewhere that was vacant. Well, he brought these guys out of Chicago and put them in a house somewhere in the county, I don't remember what. And they were supposed to report out to this one fellow's field Monday morning. Well, they didn't come, and Dad got a call at the office that they hadn't come. So he said, well, I'll go out and check the house. He went out and checked the house, and these guys had used part of their grocery to buy all the witch hazel they could get, which was 83% alcohol, and they mixed it with pineapple and grapefruit juice. And Dad said, I was scared to death. He said, I thought they were all dead. They were just cold as a mackerel hanging over the fence, some of them in the house. And he said, we just loaded the whole tribe up and took it back to the Loop. But that was his worst experience. So he had a lot of those in the 30 years, and but I'm sure that he enjoyed it. He had a saying, it'd be a great world if it wasn't for the people in it, but I'm sure he meant just the opposite because he was a people person. And you can argue about what was the demise of the sugar industry in Paulding County. There's a lot of things that contributed to it, but I think it was that little thing called the soybean. It was so much easier to raise soybeans than it was sugar beets, and that was a time when, like I said, labor was a big difficulty. So I think the soybeans did the sugar beets. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Bill. Anybody have any questions for Bill? Mike, my name. One thing I was, in researching and promoting this deal, I went to Antwerp one day, and I was talking to an older gentleman over there, and told him we was having this going on, and come over and maybe tell us what he remembered about the sugar beets. And his comments were, there isn't a bleep thing that he wanted to remember about sugar beets. So that's where some people came from, wasn't it? So, George, you want to come up a little minute? All right, here, George Rice wants to give you some accounts of what he remembers of the sugar beet days. So that was just one of my experiences with a guy, what he thought of sugar beets.
Sugar was called the foundation of life, just like the gasoline called the foundation for the automobile. And this plant was, in 1910, they decided to build a plant here in Paulding. And the governor was here, Governor Hardeman was here. What I know is what my dad told me. My dad was in the insurance business for Winkles. He was in the insurance and the land office business. We lived in town. He had 2 hired men on the farm. He had a little over 400 acres west of here. He believed in raising sugar beets and corn. And when I graduated in '33, I was put in charge of the labor. And the one fellow on the farm was with us for 44 years. And he worked for my dad and worked for me. And so that factory was built, it takes 95 pounds, they figure 95 pounds, 1960 they figure 95 pounds of sugar used by every man, woman, and child in the United States. Most of that goes into the factory. It don't go in the factory as granulated sugar, they mix water with it. And that sugar is shipped in with tank wagons or railroad cars. That's where most of the sugar goes. We never could, the beet raising could never make sugar as cheap as the cane sugar. That was always common. And here in northwestern Ohio, we have not got really the right temperature for sugar beets to have the most sugar in them. Sugar beets carry between 13 and 22% sugar. You take sugar beets are raised up at Bay City, Michigan. I've been up there. Their sugar beets have a milder climate and not so hot days, 70 degrees, and cooler nights with a lot of dew. And their sugar beets will carry a lot more sugar, so it's more profitable for them to raise it. The same thing in the Red River Valley of in Minnesota. Ohio has never been high in sugar beet raising. Sugar beets are a biennial crop. You have to have sugar beets in the ground for 2 years to have seed. And years ago, most of their seed came from Germany. And there at the last, it came from Hawaii and California. They leave sugar beets in the ground 1 year. It don't make seed. If they leave them in 1 year, then the next year they make seed. Then after they cut the seed off, they can raise the beets and make sugar out of what's beet. So it's really a biennial crop. And it was called, before, when it was first built, it was called the German-American Sugar Company. When we got in the war with Germany, the German name was changed. It's called the Columbia American Sugar Company. And it run till the last year it run was 1932. That was the last year. The reason why, a lot of the reason why it closed up, because if people as old as I am can remember what you got for grain at that time. I remember when corn sold for about 15 to 18 cents a bushel, so there was no money in anything. And the labor got 17 cents an hour to start in with, and we had no minimum wage. This country never had no minimum wage till almost 1940, till they got passed through Congress and they raised the minimum wage to 40 cents an hour, and they could only have 8-hour shifts. Before, the factories had to work 12 hours a day, 2 shifts, and 7 days a week. They got starting out at 17 cents an hour, and I think the most they got was around 30 cents an hour if they got to run a machine. 32. And when it closed up, I know when my dad got the check in the spring of '33, he couldn't cash it in Paulding because all the banks were closed. So Ed DeLatt and him, I went with them. They had to take it to Fort Wayne to go to Lincoln Bank to get some money out of their sugar beet raising. And there's things that happened that I was told about. When they always had trouble with water. To making sugar takes around 2 million gallons of water a day. They'll use up to 2 million. Plus about 40 to 50 ton of coal a day, plus your other, and about 40 ton of limestone, about four ton of coke on every day. They always had trouble. When they first started, they started putting down 10-inch wells around 700 feet deep. They wound up, I think, when they got, and still that wasn't enough water. Then they started building ponds. And John Keeler's dad, Ben Keeler, lived in the house back along the creek, and the whole family would run those pumps. When the spring of the year, when they had high water, they'd run those pumps and fill all those ponds with water. And then when the tomato company come in 1940, well, they started using water. They both couldn't run at the same time because the sugar factory depended upon their own water. And that last year they run was in 1947. I raised beets for them in 47, and I think that was the year they was running out of water, and the town couldn't give them no water at all. And what they done, they took 3 big pumps out the Bailey's gravel pit, and they started them up, and they pumped that pit dry, and that water went in the ditch, flowed into Flat Rock. I forgot to tell you, when they built the factory, they put in a 6-foot dam across Flat Rock. And that's where they catch the water in the spring of the year, and they start those pumps and pump those ponds full. And that's how they finished the campaign. So that's the last year of the factory run. Then they said they was going to run 1 more year, but the beets had to go to Ottawa. So I signed up that year. In the meantime, John Keeler's dad, Ben, and Brownie Snyder was the ones that brought you out your equipment. And in the spring of the year, and your cultivators and everything. Well, when they brought that drill out to me, in the meantime, I got rid of my 3 teams of mules and took them up in Michigan. I said, well, I can't drill beets with, I haven't got no mules any longer. They said, well, don't cut that long tongue, I'll make a stub tongue. Well, I said, I bought my tomato seeder this year. That was 1948. I'm going to sow, well, you can't raise beets 36 inches when you're supposed to be 24 inches, you won't have no yield. Well, I said, well, I'll do it anyway. And I planted 11 acres with that seeder. When I harvested them, they made almost 12 tons an acre. And they were the biggest beets I ever raised. And the sugar factory come out and newspaper and took some pictures of the field and everything. They couldn't get over those beets. And that's the last year the sugar factory took beets, 48. Then I think the next year they tried to dry some potatoes out there. And then about the next year they dried some alfalfa. At that time I was raising a lot of tomatoes, so I had my own seeder and everything, direct seeding. And they talked me into raising. Then the Great Lakes Sugar Company come in here in 1950. And I signed a contract for 15 acres, but I never got them planted that year. It was too wet. If you don't get beets out like tomato seed in March, you might as well forget about it. Because you got to get them up before you get the heavy rain, and especially beets. If you don't have beets growing so high, and there's a bug that works on those leaves, and maybe you see beets about that high in the field, next day you go out there and you can't find them. And that's the idea of having early beets. And so I didn't plant any, but the next year in 52, I planted 2 fields. And the one field was a little over an acre, made 17 tons, and another 5 acres made about 13 tons. And I left all my contracts in here that I had. And that's the most money I ever, before when I raised beets, I'd always You get around $6, $6 to $7 a ton. That's about what it costs you to get them blocked. Of course, you had your cultivating in there, and then when they topped them, the labor was paid by the ton. That was their pay.